So today we're off for a wander where I used to forage. This is back in the New Forest. We thought we'd just come and have a little wander here. I just want to see actually whether, you know, there's a seasonal thing going on with fungi or whether it's a general thing. So here's a rather damaged cep. Knocked over, but that is a cep. I'm not going to pick that because we have a rule: I don't pick the first one of anything I find. So we're going to have a continue along a wander. I don't know what these are. Yeah, let's have a look. Yeah, there's a lot of fungus about, which is a promising sign. I'm not recognising some of this. I think that might be a blusher. And then is that an oyster mushroom? If it is, it's a very old one. There's a few more dried up. Yeah, I think they are oysters, but they're past their best. But lots and lots of fungi about, including, there we go, that is a penny bun. Yeah, but as I say, I'm not picking that because we don't pick the first one of anything we find. More of what could be blushers, could be panther caps. I'm not very good at amanitas and I tend to steer clear of the whole genus. Some whitish mushrooms here that, I don't know, that could be destroying angel. It appears to be a mast year for oak, so there's a ton of acorns on the ground. We may encounter pigs today, so we might see free-range pork. There's also lots and lots of crab apples here, and it's customary in this part of the New Forest for pigs to be let out at this time of year to forage for acorns and nuts and crab apples and other things that pigs eat, and the pork from those pigs, panage pork it's called. Panage is the commoner's right to allow their pigs out to forage. Panage pork, highly sought after. I think you have to go on a waiting list at the butcher to get panage pork. I see something over here growing on a tree. We'll go and have a look at that. Now we are on a track at the moment. We will leave the track at some point and have a wander through the woods because that's the most productive thing to do. So this is, I think, a dead holly, dead or dying holly, and those do look like oyster mushrooms, but I don't know that I'd pick them off of holly. Such a lot of crab apples, and these are the true wild crab apples, Malus sylvestris. These are not like feral apples where somebody's dropped an apple core. That is the wild apple trees. Yeah, when we get a little bit further away from the car park, we'll just go for a wander off through some wooded bits and see what we can find. But I feel fairly sure we're going to come back with something in the basket today. Right, here we go. So this is a penny bun. Pretty good condition by the feel of it. Yeah, look at that. Beautiful. A little bit munched by slugs or something like that, but that doesn't matter. That one's coming home with me. Another very pale looking amanita there. That could just be a very pale specimen of the false death cap, Amanita citrina, or it could be one of the rather more poisonous ones. The false death cap, despite its kind of scary name, is actually edible, but it apparently tastes of raw potato. So there are quite a few edibles in the Amanita genus. I tend to leave them all alone because, well, it's just a troublesome family. Mushroom racism, as I've called it before. They all look the same to me. Yeah, Jenny's just spotted that. It's a very small cep. I'm going to leave it because I feel like we're going to find some more this size and so it's probably better if we let the little ones develop. If I find a lot of them, I'll pick some of the little ones, but if not, we'll leave the little ones to develop, because I think that the bigger ones will have more flavour anyway, and you get, you know, more for your money. But yeah. Right, we're going to branch off the track now, walk through the open woods and see what we can find here in amongst the trees. This is the spot where in a video several years ago I stumbled across an area where there were literally hundreds of seps, and I wasn't actually even picking seps that day, and so I only picked a couple just for my pan. I was out doing one of my tests of a ration pack, but I stumbled across an enormous drift of penny buns. I don't suppose I will ever see anything like that again in my lifetime, but anyway, I'm hoping that today there might be just one or two we can pick, plus maybe some other things. Now, that's interesting, that little bit of bare ground there, that's a deer scrape, so that's where stags have been scraping away at the soil, probably marking it with scent, and they will eventually come back, and in a month or so's time I think we'll probably hear the deer making their noises. The fallow deer makes a really weird grunting noise. Unidentified white mushroom, no idea, not picking it. There'll be a lot of that in today's video, by the way. That's the general way these videos go, is me pointing at things, saying don't know what that is, not picking it, because I do know what I do like. So here's a different bolete. This one's got a velvety top and a red stem. I think it's probably red cracking bolete, which is edible, but that's not what we're here for today. I'm mainly looking for today oyster mushrooms, seps, hedgehog fungus if we can find some, chanterelles, maybe some porcelain fungus if we find a dead beech tree, maybe a cauliflower fungus if we find a stand of pine trees. That's what I'm in the market for today. I can see down there on the mossy stump there's a load of yellow mushrooms. I'm not even going to go down there because I think that's just sulphur tuft. It isn't chanterelle, certainly. So down here there's a water course, but all of these mossy little banks and ditches. I'm going to look on the side of these because this is where you find chanterelles, in these mossy cups. Here's something I don't recognise. There's one already knocked over, so let's have a good look at it. Yeah, don't know. So yeah, won't be picking that. If you let me, if you know what that is, by the way, if you've got an idea what that is, do let me know in the comments. And when I say that, by the way, I'm not just trying to farm engagement. I'm not into that kind of nonsense. If I ask for something like that in the comments, I genuinely do value your input. It's not just, or it's not even engagement farming. Honestly, who's got the time for that? You may be wondering why the understory of the forest here is so open. A lot of people do. They're expecting to see undergrowth. This kind of forest is grazed by deer, probably cattle as well, actually, because the locals have the right to release their cattle for foraging, and so it's not unusual to encounter cows, certainly lots of deer, and those animals, well, you can see there's a graze line. If you look across the forest, there's kind of a layer, and that's as tall as the animals can reach. There is down here, I think, possibly a weedy little sap. I'm feeling sorry for that one, so I think I'll leave it, because I feel like we're going to find some more like this. Something else down there, again, no idea what that is, but even if that was edible, you can clearly see that that is going to be full of maggots. It's another Amanita. And again, not citrina because it's not yellow enough. It could be a blusher. It is still quite dry here underneath, but underneath the trees, but there's a lot of fungus in general, so that should mean we're going to find some things we're interested in addition to lots of things we just look at and say, ooh, ah. Oh. I'm being super picky today. I can see a white stick standing up. Just one moment, I'll be right with you. Just see. Oh, it is just a stick. I thought that might have been the remaining stipe of a mushroom somebody had kicked off or something. But anyway, Jenny says she's found something. Let's go have a look, see what Jenny's got. Oh yeah. That's another blusher, I think. Yeah, some more of them there.
There, and that one there.
Yeah, well, that's another one of these red-stemmed Boletus, I think. So yeah, not what we're looking for, but it's a good sign. Something there as well. Another one there, look.
Oh yeah, there's some down there as well.
Yeah. So this is the very spot where I saw hundreds and hundreds of Boletus edulis in years gone by. That is the stalk of one. So somebody's been down here and picked.
Oh, here's one.
Oh yeah, there's a little one. That's a nice little one. I think we will allow ourselves to have that one. There we go. Lovely little penny bun. Just perfect. So yeah, this is the very spot where those few years ago I found hundreds and hundreds of penny buns. Here's another one. This is not a penny bun. This is another one of those maybe red cracking bolete, something like that. I probably should get better at identifying the other species of Boletus, because there are plenty of other good edibles, and I'm probably wandering past a whole load of them. These ones, these smaller ones with the red stems, red spots, are quite abundant here.
Right, there's a whole load here.
Yes, I've seen them. Yeah, it's not these. So yeah, I may well be passing up abundant opportunities to fill the basket, but I know what I like, and so I'm looking for what I know I like. It also does mean that there's plenty left for other people who want to go to greater lengths than I do, and of course for nature. Here we go, very pale looking. Oh, by the way, that's what the basket looks like now. Very pale on the top, but that is definitely Boletus edulis. There's quite a variety of forms. So this is one with a narrow stipe and a paler cap, but it is the same species. You see a couple more over there. Right, I think we're in. One there, another one there, another one here. I don't think we're going to struggle to fill the basket today. That's good, isn't it? Makes a change. My foraging's not been very successful, but we are back in the place I used to go foraging, so you know, we're back in the spots where I know where to look. So we've got some little seps here that somebody or something has knocked over, but it's happened fairly recently, so I can still trim that up, put that in the basket. And I am trimming off the soil, the little base with all of the bits of debris and forest soil and whatnot on there, because that way there's less of it that will get into the mushrooms inside the basket. So we're doing okay. Did see another one up here somewhere. Where has it gone? There. Nice. I was about to say if I only go home with that amount I'll be happy, but I've just spotted another one. Lovely. Looks like it's in good condition. Now what I tend to do with the larger ones like this is give them a tap on top. And if they feel like a rubber ball, they're good. If they start to feel a bit mushy on top, well, you could still use them for drying, but I tend to leave them if they get past their best. They do get like 3 times bigger than this, but these are really prime specimens. Another little troop of blushers there, and what is certainly a russula, and another one there, and a small dog. Eva's got to stay on the lead today because I'd be very surprised if we don't encounter deer here, and she will chase them. She doesn't mean them any harm, but she'll run after them and they'll run away, and then that will make her run all the more. And neither of them have the sense to break out of the cycle. So one thing people sometimes worry about with foraging like this is what damage is this foraging doing to the ecosystem here. And ecosystem damage is a frequent objection to foraging. There's a very, very large penny bun. Let's just have a look at this one. I'm not picking this one because it's definitely too mature. But look at that. I mean, we could pick that because it's still very sound. That would dry well. The cap is a little bit mushy, but I'm sure that that's pretty sound. If I was desperate, I would pick that and we would slice it up and dry it, but clearly I'm not desperate, so we'll leave that one because it's dropping spores. Anyway, where was I? Damage to ecosystems. So there is no evidence that people going out picking fungi makes any difference to the biota in the forest. There is no evidence that picking fungi depletes an area, and it even doesn't matter even which way you pick them. So some people say you should cut them off, some people say you shouldn't cut them off, and various people do say the way you shouldn't do it is causing damage. There is no evidence for any of that. And indeed, in countries where foraging is a much bigger thing than it is here in the UK, there's no shortage of mushrooms. You know, France, Poland, foraging is a massive thing, and everybody gets out and does a lot of it. And if there was going to be any lasting damage to the fungi, which are an underground organism, by the way, so fungi, the bit we pick, is just the fruiting body. But if there was severe damage happening as a result of picking mushrooms, then mushrooms would be scarce or extinct in those countries, and that's certainly not. So the things people worry about, I mean, it's not bad to be thinking about these things. It's not bad to be concerned about these things, but legitimate concerns are often based on imagination. You know, once something is investigated, and it has been quite thoroughly, then we don't really need to be worrying about that thing anymore. There's another bolete, but that's the one with the red gills, so that one's staying behind. So yeah, you know, I think I get it that people worry about the damage that foraging could be causing, and what if everyone did it? Reality is not everybody's going to do it, and even if they did, the evidence is it doesn't actually do the harm that people think it does. Indeed, one of the things, this may or may not be a factor, I'm carrying this basket of mushrooms around. This is an open basket. You can see holes, you can see daylight through the weave of the basket. These mushrooms are still dropping spores, so I know the spores don't have any problems getting about without my help, but I'm wandering over a large area of forest today with a basket full of mushrooms, spreading spores around. So there are spores here that are dropping in places they might not otherwise. Good. Some reels of wire. Yeah, I wonder how long those have been there. Over here, I think I saw something on some dead wood that might be oyster mushrooms. Let's go and have a look. something growing on a piece of fallen wood. I don't think it is actually, no, this is a birch tree, so I can see that's a silver birch. So we know what this is going to be. It's not oyster mushrooms, it's birch polypore. And some more blushes, I think. Oh, and some blue oak, some stained oak from elf cups, from green elf cup. So, these birch polypores give us an indication of how long this trunk has been vertical. So, and actually there's a little bit of a kind of history of what's happened here. So you can see that some of the brackets are still aligned to when the tree was vertical. Others are growing out horizontal to the ground now. So some of these brackets formed before the tree fell. It might well have been dead and rotten for a while, standing up, and some of them formed afterwards. And I think it's actually true that in some cases fungi in wood like this are triggered to fruit by impact to the wood. So when this trunk fell down, the impact of hitting the ground, the vibration, the shock, may well have triggered these fungi to produce new fruiting bodies, because they're actually bigger and fresher fruiting bodies horizontal to the ground than there are the ones that were originally on the trunk. There is a pine tree here on its own in the middle of the woods. That is a cauliflower fungus, but it's a rather sad little one. That would be edible. It's just not worth picking. And also remember the rule of we don't pick the first or the only one of anything we find. So the fact that I've seen cauliflower fungus here means I'm going to look around the base of these other pine trees and see if I can maybe find another one, hopefully a bigger and fresher one. So another one of these probably blushers there. Now, don't make no mistake, there are ways of telling these things apart. So there's no, you know, it's just a set of identification rules that you would have to learn to understand which is which. And I haven't learned them, and I could learn them. I've chosen not to, just because, you know, like I say, I tend to focus on the things I know are really good. And so, a very large bolete there, but that's not a Boletus edulis. I think it's another one of these ones with the red stem, with the red stipe. I tend to focus on gathering what I know is really good, that I know I really enjoy. That does obviously probably deprive me of all kinds of interesting opportunities to try new things that I might enjoy if I would only try them. But I'm happy with the way things are. That I think is a Boletus edulis. We will take a look. So we must be into another little patch where, yeah, I see another one over there actually. So let's have a look at this one. Again, we just tap it, that's nice and firm. Yep, that is lovely. So there's another one there, doubtless pickable, but I shan't bother because it's not in fantastic condition. It's been trodden on or something, probably by a deer. But I did see another one along here. I can see, yeah, I can see some that have been knocked over. There's one that's been parasitised by another, by a mould. So that's a mushroom, that's a fungus on a fungus. But then there's this one here which is quite sound. There's this one here that's been knocked over, clearly been knocked over just this morning, probably by deer running through this ditch. I had no trouble picking that and taking that home. So decisions to be made here. So that one is mouldy. We're obviously not going to pick that one. That one's tiny. That would be lovely, I'm sure, but there's no point. This one is about the right size, but just feeling this cap, it's quite yielding. And I think we would just find that's full of maggots. So that one can stay. That one looks like it might be coming down with some of that mould that was on the other one. But yeah, like I say, I don't really need to be, don't need to act like I'm desperate, because they are relatively abundant when you find them. So this one here, let's have a feel. Yeah, no, that's mushy on top. that is staying exactly where it is. The deer have been running through these ditches here. You can see this has got deer tracks all the way through the mud here, out the other side. So yeah, we found quite a lot of mushrooms that have been knocked over, including some that were just knocked over this morning, so I've got them in the basket now. So besides the things we might pick, fungi wise, there are lots of little things, little milk caps and stuff that are, you know, just fun to look at. So Eva's just about to tread on a russula down there. There's another little blusher there. Possibly the same again there. Definitely amanitas. I've seen various little milk caps around, some deceivers. There's quite a lot of fungi about. It looks like it is going to be a good season. Well, it already is a good season. So Amanita muscaria, the fly agaric, is for me an indicator species. When I see those, I look around the vicinity because I very often find them in the same place as seps, and it has led me to suspect actually that they maybe have a symbiotic relationship between the two fungi. I think that's probably something worth investigating. I don't think it's just as simple as that they like the same habitat and they like the same species of tree to form their mycelial relationship with. I actually suspect that Amanita muscaria and Boletus edulis have a more intimate relationship than that sometimes. So yeah, little milk cap down there, I think. Lactarius, another one there. Another russula, in fact several russulas. When we were just sitting eating our sandwiches, we were pelted by acorns falling off the trees above. Every time the breeze blew, the acorns fell. Right, I thought there was a path down here, but I don't see it. Okay, well we'll just keep going this way, I think. More russulas down here. I really ought to get into russulas and start learning to identify them. It's not difficult apparently. It's just not a thing I've ever really picked up. So that's horse dung here. So there are the New Forest ponies come through here as well and graze and forage. And that's yeah, so ponies as well as cattle and deer are responsible for clearing a lot of the undergrowth and keeping it clear. Oh hello, this is something different. So I think what we've got here is orange, well I was going to say orange birch bolete, but there are no birch trees nearby. But it's an orange boletus of some sort, which is probably actually not a boletus, it might be a lesinum. But again, we're not going to pick those because I'm not sufficiently familiar with them. They may well be edible. I'll take a decent close-up photo. More of these beautiful brick red caps here. They're quite abundant actually around here, looks like. There's another one over there. One upended, several of them knocked down. But they are not today's target. Now that's deer poop there, and very fresh. So if we're lucky, we may be treated to the spectacle of a herd of deer going through. Now this is, now that is a Boletus edulis that's been knocked over by deer. So that one definitely is coming home with me. And so this one, I've trimmed the base off now with all the dirt. This one really does illustrate why the English name of this fungus is penny bun, because doesn't that look like a bread roll? Another one here knocked asunder by probably deer. This one looks like it might not be in perfect condition, but since it's already uprooted anyway, I'm taking it home and we'll inspect it back home. But again, looking so much like a little crisp baked bun. And again, well, this could be pigs actually. That might be pigs have rooted around there. Maybe they found a truffle. I'd love it if I could train Eva to find truffles, but old dog, new tricks. lots of chestnuts here, but not worth picking. They're often the first chestnuts to fall are a bit kind of shriveled and withered and don't actually have a nut inside them. They're just kind of like empty shells almost. Jenny's found something. Jenny's looking for chestnuts as well. So chestnut and oak are really the species under which I most often find these ceps or penny buns or porcini, whatever you want to call them. It's all the same thing. I understand in other countries they are associated with conifers. Wow, we've got to go and have a look at that. I'm not picking these, but look at those. They're beautiful. Just beautiful. And here we've got some ceps that have been knocked over a long time ago. Really great big one there, but very rotten. One that's there not quite so knocked over not quite so long ago. And another one down here that's been trampled and knocked over. And I think it must be the deer galloping through that are really knocking them flying. I can't imagine any human out here foraging would knock over ceps and leave them there. I can't imagine anybody would be daft enough to do that. If they're out here looking for mushrooms, this would be the thing they're most likely to be looking for. So here's a few more. Quite a nice firm one there. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, that's a nice one. Wow, look at that. What a specimen. Perfect example of a really nice penny bun in its absolute prime. What a lovely example. There's another one there and another one there. I will evaluate those, but I think I might leave them because my basket is getting actually quite full now and heavy. So this little spot here, we're near Stony Cross by the way. This little spot here, one of my favourite views in the whole of the New Forest. Just this lovely little valley, mixed woodland, trees just starting to turn into autumn, the heather looking a little bit brown and frazzled, the bracken turning brown. But this little valley here, like I say, one of my favourite views, if not perhaps my most favourite view in the whole of the New Forest. So here we go, New Forest ponies. Not exactly wild, but not by any means tame either. These ponies live wild on the heaths and woodlands in the New Forest. They are rounded up every year, and they all do notionally belong to people, but they don't go to stables or anything. They just live out here in the woods. They are rounded up. I think some of them are broken for riding. Some of them are exported to countries where horse meat is more popular. Lots of crab apples here again. I imagine that's what the horses are after in the woods there. So it could be ponies that have knocked over all those mushrooms we saw knocked over, although I would have thought it's more likely deer, because deer are the ones you see running in great herds through the forest. So Jenny's just noticed down here, so this is bilberry foliage here, this bright green stuff. So we're in October now, and what we have is almost like a full spring, a second spring, because it's been so dry during the summer, and then we had some cool weather and rainfall, and it's tricked some of the plants into thinking that it's spring. And so these bilberries down here, those are not berries on them, those are flowers. These plants have been induced to flower by the unusual dry spell followed by wet. Acorns falling around us there. So yeah, those won't fruit because it's the wrong end of the year, but I've seen a lot of that about, actually, lots of fresh growth of stinging nettles. I've seen cow parsley and hogweed flowering, which are spring plants. We've got this weird, well, I like to call it second spring. It sometimes happens like this when you get a dry summer and then a wet spell at the end of summer where it cools down. Look at the carpet of crab apples here. underneath this tree. Still plenty more to fall, and you can smell them. It smells like cider. So some of these are decomposing and fermenting on the ground. I wonder what it would be like to press crab apples and make cider. I imagine that would be quite zingy. Imagine that'd be quite sharp tasting. I know you can actually ferment crab apple juice and make verjuice, which is like a vinegar substitute. It's a lactic acid vinegar substitute. It's like pickled apple juice basically, but that might have to wait for another day. Right, we just stopped off here at Iworth Pond near Fritham on the way home, just because we got some cake to sample and a little bit of coffee left and the picnic rug. So I think we'll just park up here by the pond, enjoy the scenery, just recuperate a little bit after that, what must have been like a 4-mile walk through the forest to get those mushrooms. But yeah, this is Iworth Pond. People over there feeding ducks. I think we'll just not feed ducks. Somebody once told me they saw turtles in this pond. I don't know if that's true. If you're a local to this area, to the New Forest, and you know about Iworth Pond, let me know in the comments. Are there turtles in here, or was somebody having me on? I've got some odds and ends of dried fruit here that need using up, so I'm going to make a fruit cake. It's going to be a boil-bake fruit cake. Recipe for this is a really old one and featured on a page on my old website, so link in the video description to that. What we've got here is some apple rings. I dehydrated these in my own little dehydrator just because we had a surplus of apples that people gave us, so I just dried some. Figs likewise. One of our neighbours with a huge fig tree gave us an enormous bowl of figs, and we ate quite a lot of them. There's a limit to how many figs you can eat in a sitting, for reasons I won't go into. But again, when I was running the dehydrator for the apples, I quartered some figs and put them in the dehydrator. So these are dried figs. I've got this little bit of dried mixed fruit, which is raisins, currants, sultanas, and bits of candied orange peel. That's just was sitting in the cupboard, needs using up. Some dates. These have got the stones taken out. Sweet chestnuts are just coming into season when I'm recording this, so we picked a few sweet chestnuts, so these are going to go in the cake as well. Important foraging tip. If you want to forage sweet chestnuts, the difference between sweet chestnuts and horse chestnuts, or buckeyes or conkers, is as follows. So on a sweet chestnut, there are vertical stripes on the nut, on the shell here. It's also topped with a little pointy bit there that sometimes has a little tuft on it. There's one there. There's a little brush-like tuft on the apex of the fruit. The scar on the bottom is elongated and kind of looks a bit like cork. Sweet chestnuts come from inside a very, very spiny casing that opens like a flower and is downy inside, and the outside is covered with needle-sharp spines that are usually pale green and turn to brown or tan as that casing ages, but needle-sharp forest of spines on the outside of the casing. So those are sweet chestnuts, edible and delicious. Horse chestnuts, otherwise known as conkers or buckeyes, unrelated but look quite similar. So horse chestnuts, the casing, for one thing, isn't covered with needle-like spines, it's covered with little stubby spines. The casing breaks into segments, so you usually don't find the casings whole. They split apart into segments. On the inside they're leathery rather than downy, and they are a bit clammy. The nut inside is usually spherical. Sometimes it will have a flat side if there's been several of them inside the same casing. The scar on the fruit is usually circular, and often it looks a little bit kind of whitish and dusty. And the patterning, rather than being stripes as it is on the sweet chestnut, is usually swirls and circular patterns, a bit like walnut veneer. So that's the difference between those two things. You can eat sweet chestnuts, you mustn't eat horse chestnuts. They've got saponins and various other things in them that make them toxic. Some people process them to make a kind of natural soap. But anyway, these are sweet chestnuts, which are edible and delicious. So I'm going to need 400 grams of dried fruit in total. So the first thing I'm going to do is just chop this up. Chop these dates up into little pieces. I mean, I could do it carefully like that, or I could just run the knife through them like that, rearrange them, continue running the knife through them until they are smallish pieces. These will be slightly larger pieces than the raisins, but we're aiming for little chunks that can be distributed through the cake. There's 100 grams of dates, but as I say, the thing that really matters here is the total weight of dried fruit. The mixed dried fruit doesn't need any chopping up. The apple rings probably do. Now this could be tricky because I think they're quite tough. And I have just sharpened this knife and yeah, they're just quite hard. The other way I suppose I could do this is just some poultry shears like that and just chop those up with scissors into little pieces. That's actually rather more pleasant to do than using the big knife. But yeah, even with the scissors, there's quite some resistance going through there. And then the figs. And these will chop up quite easily. Just run the knife through them until they're in relatively uniform little pieces. So these are not as sugary as the dried figs I've seen in the shops. These obviously were figs that are grown in the UK, but they were very ripe and juicy and sweet when I dried them. But obviously they haven't been sun dried. They've been dried in my electric dehydrator. It might be that the dried figs that we buy in the shops have a naturally higher sugar content, having been grown in a warmer place. Then I've got to prepare the chestnuts. Now this bit is probably going to be fiddly. I could have boiled these chestnuts to get the skins off them easier. I can probably just quarter them, then the skins will come off with relative ease. I'm not bothering to peel off the inside pith from the chestnuts because it doesn't matter. We're going to need 400 grams of fruit in total, and I'm counting chestnuts as fruit. So that's the chestnuts, the dates, the figs. Oh, actually we may not need that mixed dried fruit. So the apple, okay. And then we'll just have enough of this mixed dried fruit to take us up to 400 grams or thereabouts. 414, who's counting? Now we need to boil this with some sugar and some butter. So we want 170 grams of sugar. I'm just going to use up the sugar I happen to have in the cupboards. So that's some soft brown sugar. And then I've got some caster sugar. I think I will stop short actually. I think I'll do 150. I'll just go a little bit light on the sugar. So 150 grams of sugar. I need 115 grams of butter. And I'm actually not using butter. I'm using a baking fat, a vegetable baking fat, because this is dairy free. And this cake may be served to people who have a dairy intolerance. Right, that'll do. The precise measurements of the stuff here don't actually matter all that much. These kind of cakes you can play a bit loose with the proportions. Next I need 225 ml of fruit juice. I'm using apple juice. This is actually the apple juice from the orchard, some of which I've used to make cider. So there's 225 ml of apple juice there. You could just use water. You could use juice from a carton. You could put a dash of brandy in here as part of the liquid content as well if you wanted to. Anyway, that all goes in there. And then spice. I've got ground mixed spice here, which is a mixture of cinnamon, coriander seed, dill seeds, ginger, clove and nutmeg. But any of these ground spice mixes, sweet ground spice mixes like pumpkin spice or any of these kind of sweet spice mixtures, you could even use Chinese 5-spice, will do. And so I'm going to put 2 rounded teaspoons of spice in there. I'm just going to bring that to the boil. The recipe on my webpage says to put some bicarb in here. And that's because the recipe I based that thing on said to do that. I don't see any benefit in doing that because it's not going to act as a raising agent. It would react with the acids in the fruit. So I'm going to leave that out. And we'll put some baking powder in the dry mix when that goes in. Okay, that's already boiling. So in a minute that fat will melt in. The sugar will dissolve into the liquid. It's all going to boil and cook and the fruit will start to hydrate. I'll let that boil properly and then we'll turn it down to a simmer and just simmer it for about 5 minutes. In case you're wondering why the apple juice was steaming when I poured it in there, it's because I had to that's the apple juice I froze, and so I had to thaw it out in a pan. And what I'm actually doing is I'm going to pasteurize that while we're here. Smell coming off of here is gorgeous. It's Christmas. The lid on. Right, that's had a couple of minutes simmering, and you can see the liquid here is now really syrupy. Partly because the sugar that we added has dissolved into it, but also because sugar and stuff has come out of these fruits. At the same time as these fruits starting to hydrate, I'm going to cover that, turn off the heat, and now leave that to cool down to room temperature. In continuation of our deviation from the recipe that I talked about on my website, which I think calls for 225 grams of plain flour, that's just plain white flour, I'm going to use some spelt wholemeal. Well, just going to use up this this bag because it needs using up. So we've got 69 grams there. I've got some self-raising wholemeal flour, so I'm going to make that up to about 100 and something grams. The self-raising wholemeals, but so let's say 110. And then ground almonds. I will just check what those little specks are actually, just to make sure they're not anything alive. Anyway, that's got to be made up to 225. That's good. Yeah, I checked on these little dark spots. They are just little bits of skin from the almonds. Now, that wholemeal flour was self-raising, but we only put a tiny bit of it in there, so I'm going to put a level teaspoonful of baking powder in there. So that's my dry ingredients. This fruit mixture has now absorbed most of the liquid, and it's cooled down to about 45 degrees Celsius. It needs to cool down to 45 or lower, or else when we add the eggs it will cook them too soon. So anyway, that's cooled down sufficiently that we can make the rest of the cake. We could leave that to cool down completely to room temperature longer or overnight, but as long as it's cooled down to the low 40s Celsius, we're okay. So, 2 eggs. I'm just going to beat them a little bit. I've got a cake tin, which is lined with parchment, and then into the mix here, the dry ingredients and the eggs. And that's it. I'm just going to give that now a good mix. Just to make sure we've really combined everything. My oven is preheating to 170 degrees Celsius fan, which is equivalent to these temperatures. And then we just get that into there. So dump it in the middle and let it spread out, and then it won't pull down the parchment paper. Just give it a little nudge towards the sides. It will spread when it bakes. That's now going to go in the oven. There is a bit of jiggery-pokery with the times. 40 minutes at 170 fan oven. Then we turn it down to 150 fan and bake it for up to another 30 minutes, depending on whether it needs it. We'll test with a skewer. Okay, that's the initial 40 minutes. I'm going to turn the temperature down now to 150. And I'm just going to quickly check on it. Yeah, it needs more. I'm just going to turn it round as well. This oven cooks pretty evenly, but I've just turned it round just for belt and braces. So I will set the timer now for 25 minutes and we'll check it after that time. We're at that 40 plus 25 minute interval now. I don't think we're going to be quite there. No, so there's still little bits of moist cake batter. Do you know what? It's only just under. I reckon that's going to need another 5 minutes at the most. So back in the oven for 5 minutes. Okay, time's up. Just test that again. So yeah, that's definitely cooked now. So if it was undercooked, we have raw cake batter coming out on this skewer. There's none. So I will let that cool now for at least half an hour before I try and take it out of the tin. It's the next morning and we're heading out to do a bit of mushroom hunting today. So we'll take some sandwiches and I think a slice of cake. So let's see what this cake is like inside. It's quite firm. Now I want it to fit in this box, so a wedge about like that. Oh, look at that. And those white bits are the chestnuts. And then we've got figs, dates, all sorts of other things in there. Liking the look of that. We won't be tasting that till lunchtime though. Okay, so here we go. That is the fruit cake I made yesterday. It's a little bit more dense, I would say. Quiet, you. No, Eva, you can't be involved in everything. Yeah, a little bit more solid than perhaps I might have hoped. No complaints about flavour. Is that with you? You can't have it. Figs are really nice in there. Chestnuts are interesting. I thought they'd have gone softer than that.
Yeah, nice.
Hmm. Good cake. Okay, well I think we've done good. So let's get this lot back to Shrimp Cottage and prepare this for preservation. So that is quite the haul. So I'm going to process these and dry them. I shan't cook any of them fresh because ceps aren't a thing I enjoy fresh. I much prefer them as a dried ingredient. The flavour gets really intense when they're dried. And so we're going to dehydrate them all. If I'd found chanterelles or oyster mushrooms or hedgehogs or something like that, we'd be cooking something with them right now. But I'm going to dry these anyway, preserve them for future use. So I've got my dehydrator. This tray has got a fine mesh on it, so we'll reserve that one for all the little pieces. Most of the trays are like this. And I've got a couple more trays there, and I've got another dehydrator. I had one of these before and it broke down. And so I replaced it. It wasn't repairable, but I've still got the trays. So I can put twice as many trays on this dehydrator. It will be slightly less efficient, but it'll still work. Now what I need to do is get these a little bit cleaned up and then slice them. Right, so here's how this works. I've got the compost container here. I'm not washing these mushrooms. I will just brush and wipe, because whilst some mushrooms are okay for washing, these, well, they are literally like a sponge. So underneath there, look at that, there's pores instead of gills underneath the cap. And they are literally like a sponge. They would absorb a lot of water. And since we're dehydrating them, rather than cooking them directly, that would be a calamity. Well, it wouldn't be good anyway. We'd expend a lot of time and energy dehydrating water that we've just added. So I'm going to slice these into nice thin pieces. The thinner the better, because they will dry better. And arrange them so as to tessellate on this tray. Got a lot of mushrooms here, so we've got to make best use of the space. And then the cap, well, it would be nice to cut lovely mushroom shaped slices, but in practice they end up getting broken when you're going to pack them in the jar anyway. So I will cut them in half first probably, and then yeah, the little bits will go over on that tray. Anything too small, so small it might fall through the holes, will go over on that tray. And when we get to bigger slices, we can go on this tray here. That's the plan. And now it is really just a case of put my head down and get through all of these mushrooms. So this is just one of those mushrooms, look, and it's occupied a fair old bit of this tray. So yeah, I think we may end up having to find a plan B. They will stand for a day or two in, if I put the basket out in the utility room, they'll stay for a day or two, so I can always dry them in several batches. We'll have a look at one of the more mature specimens now. Things like this. So a slug has had a munch there. I'm not unduly worried about that. I don't really care if a slug or a snail has had its mouth parts on the mushroom. These are, you know, from a hygiene perspective, you could worry about that, or you could just choose not to. I might just shave that little bit off there. I think that's a bit of dirt. So these are quite a lot softer. This one's quite a lot softer than the younger specimen. So we've got to be a little bit more careful about slicing it. But yeah, we're looking for thin slices because then they'll dry completely. And these are going to be running in the dehydrator until they are crisp, not leathery. They need to snap. And that's how we know that they're dry enough to preserve. If they're any less dry than that, they will go mouldy in storage, and that would be bad. So there's possibly a little bit of damage there. I don't know if it's just hollow because it's dry, matured a little bit. I can't see any maggots or anything like that, so you usually can tell very quickly if there's maggots inside of these. The inside will probably come across one, and I'll stop and turn the camera on if we find one that's like that. Anyway, for now, I've just got to continue finely slicing my mushrooms until we've got a full dehydrator. So these really are some of the finest condition ceps I think I've had. That might seem a weird thing to say when some of them have got these huge bites out of them, but what I mean is that there is zero evidence of maggot infestation in the caps, which is a problem that can happen. I think it's been quite a good year. I think when you get a damp summer, you get lots of little flies, and there's a population of them. And by the time the fungus comes around, the flies are all ready to lay their eggs all over them. I think in a summer like we've had, where it's been drier, the population of fungus gnats and whatnot has probably been a bit lower than usual. So we get a little bit of moisture in late summer and then a cool spell, and the mushrooms get to grow relatively unmolested by fungus gnats. So yeah, there's just nothing wrong with these at all. There's a bit of discoloration there because it's been physically damaged, but no sign of insect infestation at all, which can be a problem with ceps. I mean, if you buy them dried in the shops, don't look too closely at them. I perhaps shouldn't have told you that, but yeah, if you buy dry porcini mushrooms in the shops, you will often find they've got little pinholes in them, and that's because they had maggots in them when they were picked and dried. I imagine it's just extra protein. I'm sure it adds to the flavour. But these are quite wholesome and intact. And yeah, the stuff that's on the bottom of the stalk there, I'm just on the stipe there, keep calling it a stalk. I think we should probably accept that that is a stalk in layman's terms. Mycologists would call that a stipe, but it's pretty stalky. Yeah, again. So there's a variety of different colours you could expect in here. This is a fairly mature specimen, although still firm. So this is like a pale olive green. If you get a younger specimen of a set, which I haven't got one to hand, you'll find the pores may be creamy white or just buff in colour. Okay, here's one that has been eaten by bugs. So we can see tracks of maggots there in the top of the cap and also in the pores. So I think probably this one, well, I'll just slice it in a few other places. Yeah, I think this one's going to go in the compost. Maybe I'm being too picky, given my general stance on hygiene. You might find that surprising, but since we have the luxury of a rather splendid haul here, I don't really see the point in, and limited dehydrator space as well, I don't really see the point in keeping the really subpar examples. So this one's a very young specimen. The pores here are creamy white, and this is a thing that can confound identification. So the pores there, you can see the colour of those pores. Compare it to a more mature specimen, quite a different colour, and this is a much firmer flesh as well. At the moment, these just smell slightly sweet, faintly foresty. If they're cooked, if I cook them fresh, they would be tasty mushrooms. When they're dried, the flavour explodes. It's phenomenal. In fact, if you've had mushroom soup, if you've had a packet of mushroom soup, chances are it may have had some of this mushroom in it, because it's widely used as a commercial mushroom flavouring, just because when it's dried, it's got one of the best and most intense mushroom flavours. This could be an interesting one here, so let's have a look and see if this one's going to be sound inside. It may not be, because it's quite big and it's got some holes underneath here. So let's have a look and see what this one's like inside. Yeah, now this one's going to go That's sad. Lots and lots of little holes here. Let's just have another cut. Yep, lots of evidence of infestation there from fungus gnats. So unfortunately, this big one is going to go in the compost. That is a real shame. I mean, I could hack around in there and try and pick out some. I might go and scatter these in our own woodland actually and see if the spores will germinate. All right, so that's the end of the caps, and we have got a couple of trays spare, so I will slice up the stipes as well. They're perhaps not quite as tasty as the caps when they're dried, but they're still pretty good. There is quite a lot of waste here actually. The biggest one I picked was full of fly larvae, so unfortunately that one's going to go in the compost, but we've still got a lot of, well, wait till you see what the dehydrator looks like. It's kind of ridiculous. So this dehydrator is not designed to work with more than 6 trays, but it does. I've tried it before. It will take longer to dehydrate things that way, but we can swap the trays around halfway through as well, because the ones at the bottom will tend to dry quicker than the ones at the top, but we'll swap them around. We'll run it for a bit longer than normal, and we will still get everything dehydrated. Right, that's where we are at the moment. So that's all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the trays. This one's not quite full up yet. That's all the little bits. 5 trays are full, and we've still got all of these mushrooms. Okay, I shall just go and get the other trays. All right, so there it is. We've got 10 trays on the dehydrator. This top one has got all the little bits in there, all the small pieces, because it's got this fine mesh. There's an insert that's got a finer mesh. That'll stop those falling through. What I'm going to do, I've got an extra tray here. I'm going to slip that in the bottom, actually, underneath the stack, because anything that dehydrates and becomes smaller and falls through the gaps, this tray will catch it. Okay, out here in the utility room, where the freezer is going to kindly donate its lid as a convenient flat surface for the dehydrator, we need to set the temperature to, well, the book says 55 to 70, so I'm going to go for 60, and then the time, I don't think, oh, we can go more than 10 hours. I'm going to go 12 hours and start. And away it goes. At some point, I will swap the top half of the trays with the bottom half of the trays, just so they all get a chance to be near the heat source and the air source down the bottom here. The other thing I will probably have to do is do this in 2 stages, because these mushrooms sometimes get something called case hardening. So they may appear to be dried out, but it's actually the outside surface that's dried, and that impedes the exit of further moisture. So sometimes what you have to do is run it for a 12-hour period, leave it for 12 hours, and you'll find the mushrooms might feel a little bit moist again, and then run it for another 12 hours, and then they really do dry out. But before they go into storage, they have to be dry enough that they will snap, not bend like leather. The first drying cycle finished overnight. These have been sitting for about 6 hours now. So let's just have a look and see what we're dealing with. Yeah, there are some quite dry pieces in there. They still feel a bit like leather, and they feel cold to the touch. And there are some pieces that are still very floppy and moist. So we're clearly not done. I mean, you can tell actually there's a little bit of condensation here still. So we need to run this probably for another 8 to 10 hours. It's got a little electric fan heater in there. It's relatively energy efficient. The value of mushrooms I get from this process will be greater than the cost of the electricity I expend running this thing. So just ran that for 3 hours, and these are already now much more crisp and dry. And so what I can do now is reduce down the number of trays. You can see there's a lot of shrinkage happened. And these are pretty much as dry as they need to be. I don't need to worry so much about these being in a single layer now, because they are very nearly done. So now what I'm going to do is condense this down into a smaller number of trays, and then the final drying cycle will be that much more efficient because it's the heat. Most of the heat and the drying action happens down on the bottom layers of the stack. There are still, yeah, a few little bits of moisture there, here and there, but it's actually probably quite good to pick these off of these trays, separate them, give them a turn. You know, everything's getting moved around a bit. I need to prepare some storage space for these mushrooms I'm drying, and this is how I store my dried mushrooms. These are Dow Egbert's coffee jars, and they've got this plastic gasket here and a cavity inside the glass lid. This plastic bit comes off, I've punched holes in it, and I've filled that cavity with silica gel sachets just to capture any stray moisture. The mushrooms, when I put them in there, will be bone dry. So I've got one empty jar. I've got this jar, which is my previous harvest of seps that I dried, and as you can see, they're still in great condition. They've actually been in there a couple of years, and they're still absolutely fine. And then this jar, this is mostly jelly ear, but also in here we've got some dried chicken of the woods. So this stuff, I'm going to hydrate some of these and make a nice mushroom casserole or something, and then this stuff I'm going to powder. This lot, they can go in this spice grinder, and we'll grind them up to powder. And then I'll just sift this powder, and those larger pieces can go back in the grinder for another go. Okay, so tiny jar of really potent mushroom dust, intense mushroom flavour powder. So that's going to go in the spice cupboard, and we'll use that over the coming weeks. But I did also say something about a mushroom casserole. Oh, you know what? I'm going to put all of that in there. Free up the jar. And I'm just going to cover that, put it in the fridge overnight, and we'll see what that's like in the morning. So now I've got 3 empty jars for the current crop of dried mushrooms. This has now had its final run, and here's what we're looking for. Pieces that are brittle or crumbly. So they have to snap like that. That means that's dry. Not all of the pieces are like that. Some of these pieces of stem, stipe, have got a bit of bend to them still. Yeah, so there. I'm not convinced that's completely dry. Rather than run the dehydrator again, this is a minority of pieces, I'm actually just going to keep these pieces out and we'll use them over the next few days. Rather than try and dry them out completely, I'll just make use of them. Okay, well there's the final yield. Now that may not look like very much, but that is a lot of dried mushrooms. That's more or less everything that was in that basket, minus the few bits I put in the compost. Those are the bits which were not quite dry enough to store, so I'll use those. Interestingly, all bits of stipe, and all of the ones, mostly the ones where I cut them lengthways, so I think probably the fibrous nature of the stipe prevented the moisture from escaping. Anyway, the weight is probably going to be quite unimpressive, because most of the weight of mushrooms is water. Probably the easiest way to weigh it is to weigh my empty jars, 1546, and we'll see how much they weigh when they're filled up. I'm going to end up crunching those down a bit, otherwise we'll need more than 3 jars. Right, that's the final yield. Almost filled 3 jars. So drum roll please. The weight is 1715. So what's that? That's about 150 or something grams of dried mushrooms, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. Washing the dehydrator racks is a bit of a chore. Drying them isn't, but washing them, because inevitably little bits of mushroom get stuck onto this grid, and that's actually quite difficult to wash. So I've taken the plastic bowl out, so we've got a nice big space in the sink here. Give them a bit of a soak. Give them a rinse. Shake the majority of the water off, and then stack them. The base of the machine itself, not so easy to clean. So all I did is take it outside, give it a shake, get rid of all the loose stuff, brush into all the corners with a silicone brush in this case, and then a wrung out sponge, just sponging away the bits and pieces. It's not ideal, but it is an electrical appliance, so this bit can't be immersed. That's the closest we can get to having that perfectly clean. So for drying it, you just switch it on, and I'll run it at 70 Celsius for an hour. It's a machine that's designed to dry things, and it's a thing, so the thing it's drying is itself. This bit's quite leisurely. So here's what those jelly ear and chicken of the woods fungi look like after an overnight soak. The chicken of the woods is actually quite remarkable. The way it pulls apart does resemble chicken breast, although this feels quite a lot more soggy than that. I'm going to stew these and make a really tasty mushroom casserole broth type of thing. So those are already hydrated. Now these mushrooms aren't particularly mushroomy to taste. They just kind of smell sweet and fruity, slightly mushroomy. But I've also got these, which is the bits of my new harvest of wild mushrooms that didn't dry properly. We'll use them in today's dish, even though I've literally only just tried drying them, and they're very mushroomy. So those will just need an hour or so rehydrating. So a quick rundown of what's going to go into this casserole. Obviously those wild mushrooms, some celery, garlic, onion. I've got my porcini powder. I got a tin of green lentils. I'll put them in near the end because they're already cooked in the can. Thyme, a stock cube which will provide flavour and salt. And then all the red pepper things, including a red pepper, smoked paprika, sweet paprika, and gochujang. I'm not going to put much of that in there, but that will give us a nice little background warmth to the whole thing, as well as lots of flavour. First thing is to drain these mushrooms. And while we're waiting for that to happen, I'll prep the veg. So all of this celery, and I think I might just reserve the green leafy bits to use as a garnish. And this is going to be cooked quite a while, so the vegetables will almost dissolve into the stew. So I'm not worried too much about keeping them in recognisable pieces. I'm just going to chop that up into little dice. Right, same thing with the onion and pepper. You don't need to see me do that. So I've just got my pan heating up over there. I'm going to fry these vegetables until they're starting to take some colour. But I will need to prepare these mushrooms. A couple of things need doing here. One is to make sure that there's no tough woody bits on these wood ear mushrooms, because sometimes they've got like a woody stalk. Sometimes they come away with a little bit of the tree or bark with them. So I'm just going to sift through those carefully, make sure we've got nothing but the mushrooms. Yeah, see there's actually a little bit of moss there. Yeah, that one there's just a little bit tough. So I'm just going to cut that bit off. And all I'm going to do with these is cut them into little squares, or little morsels basically. I want to be able to eat this with a spoon, and I don't want there to be great long stringy bits that hang off the side of the spoon too much. So I'm cutting it into pieces I think will be compatible with that mode of eating. A couple of tablespoons of oil in my big pan. I will turn that down a bit because I don't want those to burn, but I do want them to take colour. Meanwhile, back over here with the mushrooms. And this stuff is chicken of the woods, which I picked and didn't have time to cook and eat, so I dehydrated it. And this, I don't know, I've never tried using this after dehydrating it before. It's been sat there waiting to be used, but there it is. I'm just again going to make sure that there's no long stringy bits there. That is a lot of fungus there. Vegetables are still going over there. I'm going to want some garlic in there. 3 cloves of garlic. So this is going to be stewed a long time in the oven. It's going to be stewed for an hour or more. So that's as far as I'm chopping that. Right, we've got bits of caramelization happening on some of the vegetables now. I'm just going to take it a bit further than that just to get some nice rich flavours in there. Time for the garlic to go in. I'm also going to put the thyme in now, about half a teaspoonful. The reason for putting that in now is that the flavours in thyme are oil soluble, so I want to get them working now with the fat that's in this pan. Okay, now I'm just going to make a little space in the middle, and we'll have a bit of tomato puree in there. Okay, now before anything burns, in go the mushrooms. This is going to drop the temperature, and they've got quite a lot of water in them, so this will stop the pan from burning now. So now those soaked pieces of porcini stem can go in there, plus the soaking liquid from the mushrooms. Most of it. I will just reserve back the last bit because it might have a bit of grit in it. A nice big heaped teaspoonful of smoked paprika, a dessert spoonful of sweet paprika, just probably about a teaspoonful of the gochujang. This is quite a hot one. I'll taste that for seasoning. I might put more than that in, but that's about all we're going to do for now. I can always add some more of that near the end. My stock cube, which remember is giving us our salt for this recipe. I almost forgot, the porcini powder will have like a level teaspoonful of that because it's quite powerful. So definitely want a bit more liquid in there, and I think I will add it in the form of a can of chopped plum tomatoes. When that comes back up to a simmer, put that in the oven just so it gets a bit more evenly cooked. This has been going for about an hour and a half now. It's reduced quite a lot. It's looking pretty good. Gonna have a little taste for seasoning and stuff. So that's got the jelly ears and the chicken of the woods. It tastes good. I'm gonna put the lentils in now. I don't think it needs any more seasoning. Just some green lentils, and then that's just going to go back in the oven. Those lentils are cooked, so it's really just to warm them through, let them absorb a little bit of the flavour as well. Okay, now to serve with this, I've got some white rice, which is more or less cooked. That just needs to steam in its own heat there. And in this pan, some broccoli, which I've just broken up into tiny florets, and that's just going to poach in, that's about ½ centimetre of water there, which should be enough to cook it. I've got the kettle on standby in case it needs a tiny bit more. But by the time this water has boiled away, this broccoli should be tender. Right, and as that's just starting to dry out now, I'm just going to test. That's perfect. So I'm just going to dry the last little bit of water off of that, and then it goes in there with the rice. I'll just stir that through. I think this is going to want a little bit of acidity just to brighten it. So a wedge of lime for each person. And then some of this luscious mushroom stew. Those little bits of celery leaf that I set aside earlier. How's that? Let's get that to the table and give it a taste. All right, now I've been tasting this all along, so I know what it tastes like already. But I haven't tried it with the rice and the broccoli, so let's just try that first. It's so rich and deeply flavoured. So just a little drizzle of lime juice across the top, just brighten everything up. That is so worth it. Well, there we go. Wild mushroom stew, casserole. I don't know what you want to call that, but yeah, such a depth of flavour in there. And that gochujang, just that tiny little bit, just gives it a little warmth in the background without being fiery or anything like that. It's just like a layer of warmth underneath all of the other flavours. I'm happy with that. I've got this leftover mushroom stew here, mushroom and lentil stew. And today my plan is to get out into some woods in Dorset. Now that I've made the baseline assessment of what foraging is like this year in a familiar place, I'm going to get out into the woods in Dorset, similar kind of woods if I can find them, and see if the same thing is going on here, because that will give me a judgment of whether I'm just being unlucky, whether perhaps the mushrooms here are different or not as abundant, or whether I've just had bad luck about the weather in the past. So this is a kind of comparison of the two things. Anyway, I want to make some steamed buns containing some of this mushroom stuff to take with me. It probably just needs a little bit of dressing up before that goes in the buns. So I've got some of my purple jam that I made quite recently. This is mostly plums, so it has got blackberries and elderberries in it, but it's mostly plum jam. To that, I'm going to add a dash of dark soy, and I'm going to chop up some ginger and put that in there. Maybe about that much ginger. Because this is going in raw into the, I don't know what you'd call this additional sauce I'm making. It's to try to give it a bit more of a Chinese barbecue type flavour. I suppose I could have used dried ginger, but I think the fresh ginger will give it a nicer flavour. I'll just taste a little bit of this now. Quite good. Quite strong because of that soy, but I think that'll do it. Now I've got some bread dough I made this morning. This was just 250 grams of strong white flour and 150 grams of water, plus obviously yeast and stuff. It's a very standard bread dough. I've just allowed that to prove. Okay, and I think this is going to make 3 buns, 4 buns, 2 buns. Divide that into 2. Roll that into a nice ball. I'm going to roll that out into a little circle like that. Okay. Not too thin, or else the filling will just leak through the top. So a nice helping of this mushroom and lentil casserole thing on the top, and then make a little well in the middle for some of this sauce. Pick it up and gather it around the filling. I'm not claiming to have made a good job of that there, but hopefully that's sealed it enough. And that one's hopefully ready to go in the steamer. Then that goes on to steam for 15 minutes. I was going to do both of them, but I think the top steamer, when I put the second steamer on there, it gets less heat and steam. So I'm going to do them one at a time. Time up. So just going to turn that off now and resist the urge to lift the lid and see what's going on. Because if I do, it will just collapse. So I'm going to move that off the heat and just allow that to sit for 5 or 6 minutes just to set up. Right, 5 minutes has elapsed, and there's the steam bun. And just allow that to air out for a little bit. I don't know if you can hear my stomach rumbling throughout. It's not lunchtime yet, but it will be lunchtime by the time I get to the woods and start looking for mushrooms. So this I'm going to carry with me, and it should have just cooled down enough to be just the right temperature for eating. Okay, so similar bit of mixed woodland in Dorset, well, as similar as we can muster. So similar sort of terrain, gravelly underneath the topsoil, peaty forest topsoil. And we're going to have a wander off the track here. There is more of an understory here, definitely a lot more undergrowth, which suggests a smaller deer population. There are various little tracks going off to the side. We're going to have a wander through the woods here and have a recce to see if the same things are happening here as they are in the New Forest, or if my bad luck has just been because Dorset is not so populous for fungi. Something's missing. I haven't brought a basket with me today. That's not to lull the mushrooms into a sense of full security. That's just because I haven't got capacity to store any more dried seps. So there's very little point in me picking seps. If I've always got a few bags about my person, so if we find something like chanterelles or oyster mushrooms or something, I can squeeze them in a bag and we'll still have a way of taking things home. But I'm not expecting really to forage anything today, I'm just having a look. So first I think we're going to wander up through this bit here. So here's our first find, what looks to be a juvenile parasol mushroom. So I will keep my eyes open, because those things, if you find one, you find lots. Okay, so a few things. These look like quite mature sulphur tuft. No idea what those little things are growing on that log there. I did see something else around here, and I've really, again, no idea what that is. But the fact that we're seeing things is a hopeful sign. At the moment, the area that I'm in is a lot more coniferous than what I'm trying to compare it to. But yeah, there are a few things around. Again, no idea what these are growing on this fallen log. And this looks like it could be honey fungus. Yeah, I would say, judging from the white spores dropped around that, I think that's probably honey fungus. Yeah, it's spread right through there, so more than likely honey fungus. That's edible. Some people do eat it. I think that's one that's slightly more than average likely to give you a gastric upset. Any kind of mushrooms might upset some people. That's why the advice is always to try a little bit first. Eat a tiny little bit first. This is not a test of whether something's poisonous, it's a test of whether an edible mushroom is going to give you a gastric upset. So yeah, you do need to eliminate the poisonous ones first, but then if you've definitely got an edible species and it's the first time you're eating it, you should just try a little bit first. Just make sure it's not going to upset your stomach. Right, we're moving into a bit more broadleaf now. Got some beech trees here. And that, I think, is that another honey fungus down there? More honey fungus. These trees are not long for this world if they've got honey fungus around the roots like that, unfortunately. Well, we'll have a wander through here because it's turning into more broadleaf. I want to see a bit more oak. Oak is really the tree species where I find the forest floor to be most productive. I'm actually quite warm, I'm going to take my coat off. More of these little things here growing on a bit of dropped pine timber. Don't know what they are. That is a common theme, by the way, in my foraging videos, me pointing at things and saying, don't know what that is. Lest you might think I'm some kind of an expert, something different here. It's a little lactarius. There's a few of those there. Not the lactarius I would most like to find, which would be the saffron milkcap. But we're not in the right kind of woodland for that, really. It needs to be pine trees with pine needles on the ground, really. Okay, now I expect you're curious about how those steamed buns turned out, so well, I certainly am. And it is just about nearly lunchtime. Certainly we are beyond 11s. So let's break out the rations. So I think this did get ever so slightly squished in my pocket, but it's still good. Let's have a look. Now, most commonly a steamed bun like this would probably contain pulled pork, but this mushroom stuff's really good. There's lots of these little lactarius around. Yeah, I'm happy with that steamed bun. That came out alright. Actually, I'm glad it didn't go and burst at the bottom. And that quick kind of bodge of a barbecue sauce that I made with ginger and jam and soy sauce has worked really well. So we have got oak above us and chestnut, which should be good. But all I'm seeing here, I've got a few russulas, which a lot of them have been kicked over by something. I've got a lot of those little lactarius milk caps, lots of sulphur tuft, a little bit of honey fungus. That's all I'm finding at the moment. We'll move to a different spot. We've got a little bit of amethyst deceiver here. there and also there. Probably more if we look around. So that's an edible wild mushroom. People worry about the bioaccumulation of arsenic in that species, which I think is probably a bigger problem on soils with a high level of arsenic, which is not here. Right, well, I'll have a look down here because there's some hazel, some coppiced hazel. Might be a different kind of thing going on underneath these. Ah, well, there is my first bolete. I tend to think that is probably a penny bun, actually. Brown stipe, brown netted stipe. Looks a little bit tall and slender for Boletus edulis, so it might not be. But anyway, that's good to see. Lots more chestnuts on the ground here. Well, I can't actually see any intact chestnuts. I think the squirrels have probably beaten me to it. But we'll wander along this line because that's where we found something. Here's another large fungus. Yeah, that is a penny bun. Rather over. And there's one that's probably still worth picking. So I think we are confirming that my success and or failure of finding mushrooms in Dorset is probably somewhat proportional to the success or failure I would have had in the New Forest. So I think it's not that Dorset is no good for mushrooms, it's just that the moments I happen to spend attempting to forage down here after we moved down weren't the best times. Okay, we're underneath silver birch and I'm seeing a lot of this fungus here. This is called the ugly milk cap. Cursed with a bad sounding name. So it is a Lactaria species. I can't remember the species name, but it contains, it's acrid tasting. It contains a mutagenic chemical apparently, so probably not a great idea to eat that. Mutagenic as in probably causes germline mutations or just cancer, not superpowers. So yeah, we won't be picking that one. That's the ugly milk cap. This is probably a blusher, but it looks a bit small. Yeah, no, I think this is a blusher. I think this is a small blusher because it's got little stripes, it's got little bands on the skirt. So it's a very small blusher. Big old clump here of clouded agaric, cloudy Clitus cybe. Lots of those in quite good condition. This is one of these mushrooms that's edible to most people. Apparently some minority of people, I think it might be a largish minority, like 15% of people who try to eat this will experience severe gastric upset, vomiting, sweats, that sort of thing. The rest of them can eat it with impunity. So some people do pick this and test themselves with it. I don't fancy that ride, so we'll leave that. So we've got some slightly more open coniferous woodland here. I'm seeing a lot of false chanterelles around. And what have we got here? Are these just blushers that are way over? Can't really say. I mentioned way earlier in this video about the false notion that picking fungi depletes the local area of fungi. Something else here, I don't know what those are. Again, could be blushers with the scales washed off. Yeah, I think that's what they are. Oh, hello, and a cauliflower fungus, but again, not worth picking. But a good indicator that we should look around. And hopefully maybe find a bigger one. Yeah, that's something I will take home if I find it's a cauliflower fungus. Anyway, yeah, I spoke earlier about the false notion that picking fungi depletes the ecosystem of them, and actually research has shown that not to be the case. The other thing that people sometimes worry about is trampling. You know, when us foragers are going off through the woods like this, we're trampling on the environment, and we shouldn't be doing that. Well, a couple of things about that. One is that happens anyway. People go for walks in the woods. That's what people do, foraging or not. So unless you're going to ban people from going outdoors, that trampling is going to happen anyway. But also, the research, and it was backed with experiments, found they segregated some bits of woodland and did research where they picked one bit, they left another bit unpicked, they trampled on things, they didn't trample on things. That's interesting. That's not a natural formation. But the research found that actually the bit that had been trampled had a higher yield of fungi than the bit that hadn't. And there's probably a good reason for that. If you think about it, if you've ever grown oyster mushrooms in cultivation, you get, for example, a bale of straw or of sawdust, inoculate it with the fungus, allow the mycelia to develop inside that block. Nothing will happen straight away. The mushrooms won't grow until the mycelia receives a shock. And that shock is often a thermal shock, so you chill it, but also you cut slashes in the wrapping of the bale, and that damage is where the mushrooms fruit out of. And so I think it's possible, and it's certainly supported by the experimental evidence, I think it's possible that actually us trampling over the woodland is stimulating the fungi to grow where we've broken the surface of the soil. Now again, like the whole thing about carrying around a basket spreading spores, I wouldn't use that as an argument for why I'm doing some benevolent thing to the forest, but the idea that trampling through the forest, which people do anyway, because, as I say, even if they're not foraging, the idea that trampling through the forest is going to destroy the nature that's living under the soil appears to be false. Yeah, pretty sure that one is Boletus bardius there. The bay bolete, quite similar and obviously related to Boletus edulis. It has a tawny brown stipe. I think when we cut that in half it would turn blue immediately. I'm not going to do that because I'm not picking today. One thing people often ask me is where to find mushrooms. Often they want to know specifically where I'm finding mushrooms. I don't generally give up my good foraging spots because then we would have a problem. But in principle, in general, so what I find is very useful is to look for boundary conditions. So here we're in a bit of coniferous wood, but there's some birch trees, a little stand of birch trees in the middle of a coniferous wood. And the boundaries between the two different types of woodland are often really productive spots. So boundary conditions, fungi can be quite fussy about where they grow. And so if you have a piece of woodland that is uniformly the right conditions for them, obviously you'll find them across that whole woodland. But a lot of woodland isn't like that. And so what you'll find is that boundary condition where you've got one thing changing into another, you've got a gradient of different conditions. And so in that gradient, somewhere is the precise spot that's just right, you know, the Goldilocks zone for some species of fungus. And so those boundary conditions can be really productive. That's why I always tend to look for mixed woodland, because, yeah, so we're changing here. So we're changing from a coniferous woodland, which is a mixture of spruce and balsam fir, mostly, although there is some birch here and lots of this awful rhododendron as well. But we're moving into a little clearing now where it's mossy. And so we've got a gradient of conditions going through here. And look, there's all sorts of fungi here. I think those might be bay bolete again. but they're a bit over. So if I had any kind of generic advice for picking edible fungi, or just foraging, looking for fungi in general, my general purpose advice would be to look for those conditions where there's a change, where there's a progression from one type of biome into another. So different kinds of trees, different kinds of vegetation on the ground, different kind of conditions. So dense woodland changing into open woodland, woodland turning into fields. You often find that the boundaries of fields, because they're overhung by the trees, and also in the kind of inner edge of the woods, can be very productive for fungi. Not necessarily the ones you want to pick and eat, but just fungi in general. Just because in amongst that gradient of conditions from one thing changing to another, the fussy fungi can find the spot they really like. We are quite near a busy road here, in case you can hear that in the background. But all sorts of things happening here. That actually could be a saffron milkcap there. Is it a saffron milkcap? What I'm going to do is just break a little piece off and see if it bleeds. It's too far gone to pick. I think that is a milkcap of some sort, and we are in amongst pine trees, so in theory, but I'm not sure that that's what that is. I've just stopped by this cutting through the earth here, and this bank is carpeted with fine moss, and there's a tiny mushroom growing out as well. So let's just have a mossy, mushroomy moment. Okay, down here, that is definitely Amanita muscaria. It has no scales on the cap, but there's really nothing much else that could be. So that, as I've often said before, is my indicator species to look around and see if I can find some seps. But even if I don't, the fact that I'm seeing Amanita muscaria, well, there you go. There is the remains of probably a sep. Let's just flip it over and see if it is. I think, yeah, it looks like it. So yeah, that is the remains of a rather rotten sep. There's a little one down in there, not quite developed. That might not be a sep, that might be a Boletus bardius. But yeah, whenever I see Amanita muscaria, I look around, because either they like the identical conditions to seps, or they have some kind of relationship with that fungus. This one here I was tempted to say is a blusher, but it's not. I think this is the panther cap, and this is one of the reasons why I don't bother with the Amanitas, because, like I say, mushroom racism, they all kind of look the same to me. I mean, they're not all the same. Chestnut tree here, and we had a storm the other day, Storm Amy I think it was called, and so the chestnuts have nearly all fallen now. Let's see what we can find. I've seen a few out of their shells already. There's one. So there we go, sweet chestnuts. Definitely a forageable thing. I'm not going to gather any of these. I shall leave these for the squirrels and wildlife, because I was lucky enough to bag a couple of kilos of these the other day. These are a bit on the small side anyway, actually. So we'll leave those for the squirrels and jays and magpies. So this really is the end of this video now. So I can tentatively conclude that my poor luck in foraging mushrooms in Dorset over the last few years is probably largely due to seasonality, perhaps just bad luck, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and so on, rather than any fundamental lack of fungi here. Just not been lucky enough, and that's the way it goes. So anyway, I hope that's been interesting. I appreciate that was a very long video, but everything in there seemed like it was in there for a reason. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.